Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge and welcome to another reaction and recap of Outlander Season 7, Episode 11, 100 of Stone. Here we go. All right, everybody, are you doing okay? Are you doing okay? All right. It's wonderful. I gotta tell you that I was very prepared to cry a whole bunch while listening to this one, because y'all have seen by now, if this is your first season of watching my reactions, you already know how easily and long I cry about this stuff. But I gotta tell you that, I mean, of course I teared up a few times. There's a few specific scenes particularly. But I actually found myself smiling so much. And I mean, a big part of that is, like I said last time, he wasn't going to be gone for long. We knew James Fraser wasn't dead. So it hurts more to see, you know, what Jamie and Claire and even young Ian, not Jamie, what John and Claire and young Ian are feeling, and having to still kind of try to move on with life. And, you know, Claire having kind of some self-harm thoughts going on and everything like that stuff is what hurts. But in general, as I've said many times at this point, this part of the story as a whole is some of my very favorite things, because let's be honest, since pretty much book 3, all right, there hasn't been much that could really possibly shake Claire and Jamie. There's circumstances that can shake them, obviously, like injuries and imprisonments and things like that, but there's never really been anything that could be a like super emotional wedge. Again, I mean, since book 3, right? That was never really a threat. And what we're going into now, well, it's still not really a threat to them. There are still some very interesting, you know, dynamics and things that are going to have to play out. So enough of that. As I always say, if you're new here, if this is the first one, well, hello. I am a romance booktuber as well as an Outlander superfan, and I like to recap and review the episodes of Outlander. I've been doing that for, what are we at, 4+ years now, and I have an entire playlist of all of my Outlander content, both books and show. You can check that out. I also currently am doing a book club with Outlander, and we happen to be actually on book 7. That was not on purpose at all. That literally just worked out that way. And the way that I do these is that I am a book-focused person. So I will do a recap of the show, walk you through it, kind of, as I said, like recap and react to that. And then I will do a breakdown and talk about how accurate it is to the book. Again, I am book focused here, so if you don't want to hear those parts of it, that's fine. You can stop when we get to that part. But I know a lot of people who either don't read the books but want to know how accurate it is come to me, or else people who they just want to chat with other people in the community, because after you listen to this, you can go chat in the comments with other people, which is wonderful. And then at the very, very end, I give an accuracy rating out of 10. And we've been doing very well for this second half of this season for sure. So one other tiny little change I'm going to make this time is because of how this episode, some of the jumping around in this one between the different times, I know we need to keep people up to date with what's happening with Bree and Roger and Jem. Like, I am worried about what's happening with Jem, but I do feel that because there's such emotional weight happening in the things with Jamie and Claire, that some of these pop-ups we're having, particularly the stuff with Roger and Buck, just feels like we're just treading water until we're able to continue on with that story. So I almost wish, and sorry, this is a bit of a like spoiler towards stuff, I almost wish we'd had the hints of stuff in the first episode, and then we did an episode where we just did the Buck and Roger in the past and Brianna and what's going on in 1980. I wish that we had just jumped between those two times in one episode. That's just my personal feelings about that, because I know we're peppering in those things very sparingly to help us not forget what's going on. Oh, don't forget about Jenn, because it is important. But I'd rather we just put that aside and then give a full episode to it than kind of what we've been doing. But anyway, I brought that up because the way I'm going to do this recap today, I'm actually going to talk about all of the scenes with Roger and Buck and the 2 scenes with Bree and well, is it just the one scene? Yeah, it's 2 scenes. One with just Bree by herself and one with Bree and Rob. I'm going to like recap those parts, even though they were dispersed. Normally I go chronologically through the episode, but I just don't want to break up the action in how I'm telling it to you. So that is a choice that I made. So I'm going to talk about Buck and Roger, and then Bree and Rob, and then we will go through all the stuff in 1778 with both Ian and Rachel and with Claire. So anyway, be that as may then, we have about, I think it's like 3 scenes with Buck and Roger is kind of what it worked out to be in 1739. So remember in the last episode, we had the great look at Galus and Dougal, and we received the dog tags from Dougal, and he gets word that there's a tinker is where that they like got this from and everything. And I think that one of his men played a game with the tinker and one, I don't know. I don't even remember. The point being, he gets sent after this tinker. So we have Buck and Roger on horseback mostly through all of their scenes, and Roger's giving a bit of more of the backstory about like how his father went missing and yada yada yada. That's pretty much what that whole scene is, and Buck listening or whatever. Then in a scene we have him finding the tinker and the tinker telling him, you know, where he got the dog tags and trying to get clues about where that ferryman might have been from. Roger ends up purchasing a necklace with a gemstone from the guy, saying that, you know, when it's time to go back, at least we found one gemstone. Then there's a scene where they do come across a jacket. They come across a RAF jacket, which is very clearly a World War II officer jacket. It's not like other troop jackets that we've seen on, you know, the redcoats or anything like that. And there's a man who has it hanging on a branch, and Roger wants to know, like, where'd you get this from? And the guy's super defensive. He's like pointing weapons at him. Some other men come off and they basically chase them off. And Roger's just, you know, please just tell me where he is. Like, what's going on with this? And Buck is like, he might have traded it, and he's like, he would never give it up. And he's like, well, what if he needed food? What if he needed that? You know, like, your jacket's only so important if you're still alive, right? So he's like, I guess that could be, we're not sure. And then a kind of like final scene with them is when they are like sleeping by like a stream or something for the night, and Roger is kind of reminiscing about like, or grumbling about like, this can't be a coincidence that I get pulled back to a time where my father would be. So what does all of this mean and everything? So those are condensed quickly into one, like basically all the scenes we get with Roger and Buck. And this is kind of what I'm saying, is that it's not that it's unimportant that we get this information about his dad. I think it's perfectly fine that we get it. It's that it feels like we're treading water with it, and a lot of those scenes are very repetitive with the information they're sharing. We get it. We're nervous about Jenn. Where is Jenn? But there's also not a ton of urgency behind it anymore, because it feels like it's just drawing it out, right? That, again, has nothing to do with a comparison to either. That's just my thoughts on it as like an episode of television. So those are all the scenes with him. Now, we get 2 scenes, as I mentioned, with Brianna. The first scene is her alone. She sees that Mandy is sleeping. She goes into the kitchen. She struggles with a drawer. She ends up slamming her thumb. And then we come back to her in another scene. So that's just a tiny little sliver of a scene of hers, right? And then we come back to her later, and she's put a Band-Aid on it. She's taking a drink, and Rob Cameron appears. So there we have it confirmed that he never took Jenn anywhere. We don't even know that Rob can travel. We assume he can because of the fact that he knows everything about it, but we don't even know that he can, right? He set it up. And so he actually left Jenn's scarf there to get Roger to leave. So this was all a setup. They played right into his hands. So in my opinion, this has always been one of the things in the books that, like, this explains then why Roger got pulled to the time that he did, because he was looking, he was trying to find Jeremiah Mackenzie, and he gets pulled to a time where there's a Jeremiah Mackenzie, but it can't be a time where he himself already is, like, there, because you aren't supposed to exist in the same place as yourself. At least that's what we've heard anyway, but that's kind of how it is. And so he gets pulled to that time where his father is. Anyway, that's my thoughts that I've always had about the book. There's no proof of that for sure, but those are my thoughts on it. Anyway, he does get pulled to a Jeremiah Mackenzie, but it's not his little boy, because his little boy was in his time with him, So Rob shows up, and yes, it is about the Frenchman's gold. He says, your son isn't telling me, and I need you to come and convince him, because if he won't, then I'm going to have to get really serious about it. We're going to get on a plane. We're going to fly wherever we have to go to get it. Because, yeah, that is the thing, is that the place that they hid the gold is in America. It's not in Scotland. They're literally in Scotland in 1980, and the gold would be in the 1770s in America. Not the same thing, right? Not the same place at all. So, anyway, he tries to threaten her. She tries to get him with a knife. He's able to stop her, but he's a dumbass, and he thinks that he's going to hold back Brianna, Randall Fraser, Mackenzie. Like, no. Hello, no. And so she smacks him with a pot, but that's where we end it with her. So that's why I said there's only 2 scenes with her, but we now have confirmed that Roger and Buck will not be able to find Jem where they are. So what's going to happen to them? What's going on there, right? Because there's no Jem. But Roger doesn't know that, and Bree has no way to tell him. What are we going to do, right? Sorry, just a side note of this. Like, when I read this in the books the very first time, my mind was so, like, oh, Diana's just amazing. My mind was just, like, completely blown by it. Sorry. Okay, so now let's go back to the 1778. So, at the very beginning of this episode, before the intro, we started with the marriage ceremony, and it, of course, is very heavy, very sad. We have William is there watching it, but we have Claire and John getting married with a priest there, or a pastor. I don't know what they used back then, a reverend, whatever he'd be. And I thought it was just very poignant, and they did a good job of showing this, of like when she looks over at William, it really feels like Jamie's presence is kind of there, and she sees him like laughing, and it's just so hard. But they do end up completing the marriage ceremony, and then we have her, I think, like, she goes up to her room and lays on the bed and cries, and it's very hard to see. And then we have the intro, which ends with the white stag walking across the field, and we'll get back to what the reference to that one is, but love it. Very chilling, very well. Ian, who is making a kind of stone structure for Jamie, and he's praying for him, and Rachel comes upon him. This is what we'd seen in the stills that I talked about, where he was building this, and it was for Jamie, and we see Rollo and Rachel there with him. And so now he tells her about that he told his father about her before he died, and she's like, was he okay with me being a Quaker? And he was like, he just wanted me to be, with someone who loved me, which is very powerful for sure. Then when we have Rachel and Ian again, I'm kind of condensing some of their scenes too, that are apart from Claire, just to condense stuff. So then there's also a scene where he is going to tell her about Emily, and so he does say, I had a wife, and so she's assuming that he's like a widower, but then she's like, her name is Emily. And she's like, what do you mean you had a wife, but your wife is still alive? So then, of course, he has to explain the whole thing about when he started staying with her people, and that she was his only family for a time. They lost the little girl, Isabel. They lost another baby. then he talks about, I have seen her since then, and I actually have a child with her, but I'll never get to raise him. So he dumps the whole thing out for her. I'm very proud of him for doing that. And he, explains basically how worthless he'd felt by the fact that she just picked another husband, and he just explains it all. He's like, are you like okay with that? And I thought the actress who plays Rachel did such a good job of just like listening in an active listening place. Like you see the tears welling up in both of them, and when they kiss, it's so beautiful. They're really doing a great job with that, and I'm really impressed with John Bell. I'm very proud. Like I've said this before, I thought he played a wonderful wee young Ian, like when he was the 16 to 20-year-old guy. But this older, a bit heavier Ian is a bit harder one to play, In the age of things, the man is about 30 at this point, too. It's not like he is a child anymore. And seeing him with Rachel's when you really get to see that a bit more gravitas that he does have to give. And I think he's done very well with showing grief and with showing that. Okay, so now we go to a scene where it's clearly just after the wedding, and William is asking John, like, why did you go through with this? And Gray is like, I know you might be thinking of your mother. And he's like, no. I respect her. She is a rebel. And why are you, what are your comrades going to say? You're going to get, what is your reputation going to be with? You're married to this rebel sympathizer. You're married to this traitor's wife. And he's like, I know he was your friend, because John said, he's like, James Fraser was my friend, and this is the service I can give him, which, again, we understand. We know what that means to John. We do. But William doesn't, right? And he's like, he was a groom, Papa. Why would you take this risk for him? And it's a really, beautiful moment, and I appreciate so much how the actor is playing this on so many levels, right? Because he's grieving Jamie. He loves his son. He also knows, hearing his son say, why would you do this for him? He's just a groom. And it's one of those things, too, where, John is probably thinking, it's Jamie was never supposed to get to know William with how things are now. But now he's thinking he really never will, and the gift that John's been given to have been William's father, and looking at him and having William say, who is he? What did he do? And him have to be he's just my friend, when really it's he gave me you, and you don't see that yet. You don't understand. So very powerful scene. And he was like, why would you risk your happiness for this man? And John, it's such a beautiful moment. He puts his hand on his face, and he's like, my happiness, I have everything I'll ever need. And I was like, so good. It's such a good scene. Okay, now we get into some of the really intense stuff again. I'm going to keep pushing through all of this for sure. So Claire and John, we see lots of kind of grieving scenes with them, which are very powerful. We have her screaming. She's drinking. She thinks about self-harming herself. She thinks about taking something. She thinks about hurting herself in more permanent ways. But she hears Jamie talking in her head, and some of the conversations he's even had with her of I don't want you, I want you to live if something happens to me. And he's like, I can't imagine it without you. Death is just another, waiting time between it, all of those things. And so she can't do it. But she's screaming in agony. And then we cut to John, who's down in his study, looking at the chessboard, which is something very meaningful, right, between him and Jamie, and him crying. Oh, it's just so painful. So eventually, after hearing her scream off and on, he finally goes up there, and she, doesn't want to see him screaming on the floor. He comes and sits with her, and he basically says, he's like, I don't want to mourn alone tonight. And we have lots of flashes of it, so we don't see any of the goods, as it were, or any of the solicitation going on right there. But it's clear that they're kind of taking each other's clothes off a little bit. At least Claire's kind of ripping at his. And they wake up in bed together the next day. And now we have one of my favorite scenes. This is one of my favorite scenes in the books. I love it so dearly. Where, you know, it's awkward that they wake up, but they have this really frank conversation together. Her asking like, I thought I dreamed that we did this. And she's like, how long has it been since you've been with a woman? And John, sorry, their names are so close together. John is like, it's been 15 years. And they have a little bit of banter about this. And then John now actually tells like, he offered me himself once. And Claire knows this. Jamie's told her. And we also know from what Jamie told Claire that if John had said yes, like he would have killed him. He's like, I would have snapped his neck if he'd accepted it. And John doesn't know that, but he does know that it would have ruined everything. And so listening to it from John's lips and her being like, why did you say no? And he's like, I mean, I didn't want to. I wanted to say yes, but he's like, I would have ruined everything. He's like, I wouldn't have had the friendship. It's also, you know, clearly implied. He's like, I wouldn't have been the one raising Willie, because we know that. He's like, I wouldn't have given Willie to him. Because it was a risk on Jamie's part of what he's seen of, you know, homosexuals and the depravity that he's seen. Although, as it said, I wouldn't call Blackjack Randall a homosexual. It said that he's a sexual sadist, and it doesn't matter who's teacher. Anyway, side note. But Jamie doesn't know great things of them, right? And would possessing a child who looks so much like Jamie, like, what would that mean? Like, there's just so much on the line. And John is a good man. He's a good man all the way through. He really is. And he knew that by not taking that offer, by not seeing to his carnal needs, he received such a greater gift in return. And that isn't just of being William's dad, but it was of staying in Jamie's high regard, really. And that has been the greatest gift that he could have. So more pillow talk between them, which is actually really good. We talk about, she's like, have you really been alone all this time? And we talk about someone who was John's lover. She asked him though, like, have you ever had a lover that you were able to just get to like talk with in bed and, you know, share your hearts with and everything? And it's a really beautiful scene. I love it. I love it so much. The book and the show, like, they really merged together in that scene for me, and I really liked that. So anyway, then we go to, we don't know how long this has been, but Ian actually stops by Lord John's house to see Claire. Claire is back working at her potion. She's making some tinctures to take to Henry Grey to see how he's doing. And Ian wants to check in on her. He says, I'm going to be taking Rachel to Valley Forge to see Denny. Wanted to see you in case you were planning to leave, right? Because Ian knows she's from the future, and he also knows that his cousin is there. And so it's like, maybe she's going to leave. And Claire finally like says, because that is something Jamie has always encouraged her to go. And she said no again and again and again. But if she truly thinks he's dead, you know, why wouldn't she go home to her grandchildren and her daughter? And one of the things I would like to say right here, and my friend Kim, again, hi Kim, if you're watching, pointed something out that I immediately was like, duh, thank you for saying that. The biggest issue with this for me isn't anything with their conversation, except for the fact that when she says, the future doesn't feel like my home anymore, I need to stay. Well, one of the big reasons, sorry, I'm already getting into book stuff, but I'm going to share it right here, is Fergus and Marsley and the kids are still there. I know that we don't show them in the show because of this, that, or whatever, but why can't we even reference them anymore? They didn't just disappear. That's a whole family. And Fergus is like a son to her too. He loves, or she loves them. And I know that Claire's reason for coming to America was not Marsley and Henry Christian, but that doesn't mean they just disappeared. Like, what the hell are we doing with that? So anyway, that irritated me, and when Kim pointed it out, I was like, yeah, that was annoying. So, but anywho, she says the future isn't her time anymore. We've got to figure out how to do it. Ian feels like he lost two fathers because Jamie, I mean, again, to be real, he lived like with Jamie being his dad longer than with Ian, basically, you know? So he's like, I feel like I lost two of my fathers at once. And they're like, just keep breathing. Okay, so now we go to see Henry. He's doing well, but he says that he wants to marry Mercy. And John is like, no, you can't. That is illegal. That's not going to be happening. And Claire's just listening while this happens. She doesn't say anything. But if Mercy, being a Black woman who is a trader's widow, right? That is like triple the bad news, okay? This isn't John being a bigot or being a bad man. This is him being a practical man and caring for his nephew in the moment, right? And so when they get in the carriage, though, Claire starts being her future-minded little self right here. And I don't blame her, because in this instance, you're just so like frustrated for them. You want them to be together. And John is like, your father will never approve that. That's horrible. And when Claire is like, why, you know, you're being a bigot. And he's like, no, she's a trader's wife. It's illegal. His father will disown him, which would then mean that he would be in even more danger because they wouldn't have money and he wouldn't have a title. And he'd be married to a trader. Like, all of these things would be very bad. And Claire's like, well, someone has to be the first to do something, right? She's like, someday people can marry whoever they want, and someone has to be first. And John, being the man of his time, is like, so that means that he needs to be a martyr and be the first one to do it? Which, there are arguments on both sides of this. I'm just, you know, reiterating what's in the show. And then we have this exchange, which I did write the entire exchange out because it was stunning. The acting in this carriage scene is phenomenal, okay? It was excellent, all right? Claire says, would you not have sacrificed everything for love? And John says, perhaps I should be grateful that his heart was never belonged to me. And Claire says, you once spoke to me of the unbearable loneliness. How could you, of all people, wish that upon your nephew when the woman he loves wants him back? So, making the parry of like, well, Jamie didn't want you, but Mercy does want him. Why can't they have it? And John says this, and damn, I wish that he could get an award for this scene because it was wonderful. It was great. He said, because I know what it is, madam, to have your love be a crime. Goosebumps, anyone? To live in fear of discovery and of violence. I will not allow Henry or Mrs. Woodcock, for that matter, to risk imprisonment or worse. So good. I mean, heartbreaking, but also true. And just David Barry's face, the tears, not kind of like, oh my gosh, it was fantastic. Okay. Again, got to keep moving along right here. So, now we skip a scene, and John is trying to get Claire to agree to, like, co-host the party with him. Well, I mean, he's hosting the party, but for her to show up. He promised that he would host a fundraising thing for General Howe. And, you know, this would be obviously for the loyalists. He needs to host one to kind of prove that he is. And she's like, no, I'm not interested. And he's like, we have to put on this show. He's like, you don't have to be in my bed. You don't have to do any, but like, are you my wife or not? And if you are in this house, we have to survive. And if we survive and we have each other, then we have him, you know, which is saying like, we'll keep his memory going. And she doesn't say anything. So then it's time for the party. And John is greeting all of his guests all alone, just standing there being like, waiting for this to be over. And Claire does come down wearing the gown, wearing her ring again. She has both of their rings beside each other, which is really beautiful, actually. Kind of love that. She still has Frank's ring on. Well, I did it wrong. Whichever hand we're on. But she now has Jamie's and John's ring next to each other, which is kind of interesting in my opinion. So she greets all the people with them. She is then chatting with William, and Miss Peggy Chu comes up, which I will talk about her in the stuff later on, but I was confused about the difference between Peggy Chu and Peggy Shipman, but we'll get back around to that. Then she ends up dancing with Captain Richardson, right? Now, Captain Richardson was the one in the previous episode who told John that they were going to arrest her. Well, he dances with her, and he admits that he's a rebel. And he says, I am actually undercover with the British, and I was the one who warned John because they were going to come arrest you, and I didn't think he was going to marry you, but this could actually work for us. We basically asked her to spy on John, and she's like, I am not going to spy on my husband and his family. I'm not doing it. And then he goes to try to threaten her, and she's like, hey, you don't have to threaten me. I am not going to tell anyone that you just told me you were a spy. I won't. But also, I'm not going to work against my husband. Which is great. Apparently, she's learned her lesson. But she's like, but I'm not going to tell anyone because we are on the same side. I'm not going to help. So, very proud of her in this one single instance of her being like, you know what? I flew too close to the sun. I'm going to stay out of it, but you go. You go for it, right? So then we go to the last scene, which is wonderful. Here, the next day, John comes into her sitting room, and he's like, we have all of these invitations. We have to pick one of them. And now she's being a little more amiable, and she's like, okay, we need to. And he's going through the mail, and then, boom, someone bursts in, and who should it be but the badass man himself, James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser, is not dead. He's not dead. We knew he wasn't dead. We had to make it a whole episode thinking so, but here he is. And Claire, of course, jumps up and goes over and kisses him, and it's beautiful. She's like, there it is. And he's like, what? And he's like, my blood, you're here. Like, it's great. It's wonderful. And John, of course, is like, how are you alive? And he's like, well, I wasn't on the ship that you thought I was, but my bags were on that ship. The dude left without me, all that goodness. So he lost all the stuff, apparently, but he's still alive, which is wonderful. So then, Claire's still in the middle of all the kissy, and he's like, there's soldiers after me, because we are still in occupied Philadelphia right now. So not the safest place for one of the American, what is he at this point? A captain, a general, whatever he is. Not the best place for him to be, for sure. Though it is funny, because when he left America, he did so with an escort of British. So just saying, they sure changed their mind on him real quick there. But then John is like, hate to burst your bubble, but your son will be returning shortly. And so he's like, okay, nice to see you, John. Hopefully we'll talk again soon. Bye. And so him and Claire are like going to run for it. And we walk outside, and who should be standing at the top of the stairs but Willie, who has just overheard everything and says, who the bloody hell are you? And Jamie says, I'm James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser. And he says, and who the hell am I? And then he says, you're a stinking papist, and your name, the one I gave you, was James, and that's all that I could give you. And some very good acting on his part, even though I hate the words he says. He says, God damn you, sir. I don't want your name. And he gives him back the rosary that Ian had given him, which is a very tough thing. But in the midst of all this, now the soldiers come running up, and Willie's being all like, what are you doing here? Still trying to help a little bit. And what does Jamie do? Quick thinking man pulls out his pistol, points it at John's head, and says, I'll shoot him if you try to do anything. And he takes James captive, or James, I'm sorry, their names, you guys. He takes John captive and takes him down the stairs. And Claire's just left there smiling. And the episode's over. So, what an episode. Y'all, it still took me 30 minutes to get through it. What am I? Who am I? Okay, but this episode, all right, again, it starts off so sad, so intense, but when it was over, I was smiling so big. I just loved it. I thought they did such a great job. I do have a few more critiques for this episode than I have the last two. There's some things to get into. But if you don't care about the book comparison, you just go and have a real good day now. Tell me what your favorite parts were. But let's go ahead and get into it, okay? I was sitting here getting my notes ready for this part, and I was ready to say, we finally finished all the scenes that we'll have from this book, but that's not true. we still have some left, because there is still the reaction of Jamie and John, like what's going to happen when Jamie finds out, is still in this one. I, for some reason, thought it was in the beginning of the next one, because there is some fallout, of course, that will continue into the next one. But I was going through it and I was like, nope, there's still like this many pages from this one left. But we got through another good chunk of it. He really is only gone for a couple chapters total. It is hardly any at all. But they're such heavy weighted chapters, you know? So, pulling out my notes and my book here, let's go through everything here. So, I will say that the stuff with Roger and Buck, I'm not going to really go over anything in comparison. A lot of the stuff that happened in this one, we already kind of talked about, because that happens like on the way to the garrison, which it doesn't appear they're going to be going to the garrison. I said they would have to pry that from my cold dead hands, and maybe we will. Maybe I'll just have to die on that hill and then I'll be done for it. No, I don't know. And then the scenes with Bree were basically from chapter 91, which I'm going to touch on those first, just like I touched on the other stuff first in the other one. And there's actually literally just like one page here, or 2 pages here. But what got left out of the show, and I don't know if they'll get to this, right, is we have her tucking in Bree, right? Or Mandy, Bree is tucking in Mandy, and she goes into the study and she's looking at some books. Now, there were some books about the American Revolution that Roger had ordered, and there were also her father's books. So there's books by Franklin W. Randall. And inside one of the books, there is a folded sheet of paper. And it was no surprise at all. The letter was a draft. She could see at once from the crossing outs and the marginal notations. But there was no salutation, but it was plainly written for her. So this is what we haven't seen in the show yet. I don't know if it'll be there or not, but this happens in the same chapter that Rob shows up. So she's reading this letter, actually, from Frank that says, "You've just left me, dearest Deadeye." That was her nickname, right? "After our wonderful afternoon at Sherman's, the clay pigeon place. Will she remember the name? My ears are still ringing. Whenever we shoot, I'm torn between immense pride and envy of it, and fear. I don't know quite when you will read this, or if you will. Maybe I'll have the courage to tell you before I die, or I'll do something so unforgivable that your mother will... No, she won't. I've never met anyone so honorable as Claire, notwithstanding. She'll keep her word." What a queer feeling it is writing this. I know that you'll eventually learn who and perhaps what you are, but I have no idea how you'll come to that knowledge. Am I about to reveal you to yourself, or will this be old news when you find it? I can only hope that I've succeeded in saving your life either way, and that you will find it sooner or later. I'm sorry, sweetheart. That's terribly melodramatic. And the last thing I want to do is alarm you. I have all the confidence in the world in you, but I am your father, and thus prey to the fears that afflict all parents, that something dreadful and unpreventable will happen with your child, and you are powerless to protect them. And the truth is that, through no fault of your own, you are... And then he had changed his mind several times, writing a dangerous person, or always in some danger, or in a dangerous position, but he never really got to the point. And then she heard footsteps, and they were a man's footsteps, and every hair on her body rose. And then she looked at the man and said, "What are you doing here?" And it was Rob Cameron who said, "I'm here for the gold. If you'd like to keep your son alive, I mean, boss." So that basically sums up all of the scenes we saw with Bree right there. So also in the book, as I said, we do see what Jamie's going through in how he missed the boat, and now he's on the boat of a different one. So something that I wonder if they'll do with the start of the next episode, right? I wonder if they'll do a little bit like they did in episode 9 of the series, where, you know, we started with Jamie's, like, what he's going through to get Claire back from Blackjack Randall. I wonder if it'll show him missing the boat, and then, like, maybe being seasick on the boat, and then maybe getting there and discovering that the boat sank and all these things. I wonder if we'll have that, like, all in a intro thing and end with him showing up and, you know, kissing Claire and all that scene again. I wonder if we will. That would be cool if we did. I don't know if we have time to retread the ground or anything, or if he'll just say it all in a couple sentences in it, but it would be cool if we did that. But let's see, what else here? I took notes on this, of course I did. Yeah, so the show covered chapters 93, which is where we kind of ended. The last episode was mid 93 with her fainting, and then we have her almost wanting to kill herself. She is remembering Jamie a whole bunch, hearing him say that you'll be okay. And Jamie reminiscing on death and what it is and all that stuff. So then in chapter 95, which is called Numbness, this is the one where she is actually kind of like hallucinating Jamie because she took some syrup of poppy, right? So she's basically like taking some opium and, or an opiate, whatever, and has kind of drugged herself a little bit. And so she's literally like dreaming of Jamie, and John comes in. And so in the book, it's like she's having a conversation with Jamie, but it's actually John. And then John is saying, like, I will not mourn him alone tonight. So those same type of things. But when they wake up, we have a lot of the same conversation. They did a great job with that. But there is a little bit more flavor, of course, that Diana puts in because she just does. There's even of like this funny scene where she thinks he has to like fart because of how much like beer they've been drinking or something. And she's like, if you need to fart, don't worry about it. Just do it. Which I know, I completely understand why they don't put in the show. But throughout the book series, this is something you'll know if you've read it, Diana puts in people's bodily functions. She just does. And so there's plenty of times where Claire will like smack Jamie because he like farted in bed or like belched in her face. Just the things that happen when you live with someone. I get why it's not romantic to put on the show, but she literally tells John, like, you gotta fart, just go for it. And he's like, I beg your pardon, madam. And he's like, would you hesitate about it if you're in bed with a man? And he's like, well, that would depend on the man by and large, though. So anyway, then they have the same question about his body and about, like, if you're giving it up. And he admits it. He's like, if I had taken him, that would have destroyed forever what did exist between us, which is just beautiful. We have a lot of the same conversation, as I said, except something else the book does, which, again, Diana's just fascinating. She's so fascinating, y'all. Because after they have the conversation about, like, the stag and about how long it's been since he's had sex with a woman, he asks her if he could see her naked. And she's like, what? And he's like, I haven't seen a naked woman that wasn't a slave. He honestly says it because she's like, you haven't seen Isabel? And he was like, no. Which leads me to believe that, because I know he had been with his wife, but I assume it was probably under the cover type of thing where he was able to picture someone else. So, they basically show each other themselves naked, and it's this kind of beautiful, like, both metaphorical thing of like being laid bare to the other person, as well as just there's just this really cute, like, it's a cute scene, you know, like she shows herself to him and she shows her, and he says, he's like, you're very lovely. And she's like, for a woman my age. And he's like, no, not for a woman your age, not for a woman at all, I think. As what? I'm an object, a sculpture, whatever. And he's like, as my friend. Oh, I say, which is Claire, very, thank you. And he's like, since we're friends, blah, blah. Okay, so that's when we talk about Minogue. All that's great. Good stuff. Great. Okay. So then we have chapter 98 from the book, which is the party stuff, which we now are which we discover, what happens at that? Oh, okay, so this is the Peggy Chew stuff. So I'm going to talk about this for a second. So I looked it up because when William was like, this is Peggy Chew, I was like, wow, why do I recognize that name? I was thinking of Peggy Shipman, who is also a very important character. So I looked up Peggy Chew Howard very quickly. So this character, she's a real woman. In this time that we're seeing it, she would be actually like 28 or no, 18. She'd be 18. She was born in 1760 and this is 1778. So she would be like 18 in this. And her father, what's it say here? So her father was good friends with George Washington. So that, when you think about it too, is part of the reason why, you know, that's just very interesting that she would be at this party. Now, Chew was pursued by many suitors, including Major John Andre. Now, in the book, John Andre is mentioned. He's not mentioned really in the show, but John Andre, if you ever watched Turn, the story of Washington's spy ring, you'll know that John Andre is responsible for using Peggy Shipman to turn Benedict Arnold. Now, of course, she didn't do it all on her own, but Benedict Arnold, who I definitely don't have time to go into all of that, but we did see Benedict Arnold earlier in season 7, both before and after his like major injury he has that will lead to a lot of the like hatred and things that happen for him. But Peggy Shipman and Peggy Chew were a lot of friends, and something that would happen is that John Andre ends up getting hanged later on. So great. We love it so much. She was friends with Peggy Shipman, and she would actually be, it says Peggy Shipman would use letters sent by Peggy Chew to Andre to interline secret messages in invisible ink. So she would she used to kind of be used by her friend. So eventually she met John Edgar Howard at her home during a battle in the Revolutionary War. And so she was married to him, and George Washington actually even wrote about the ceremony in his diary, and Peggy would reminisce about Andre courting her, and it would make her husband mad, and her husband would say, like, he was a damn spy, sir, nothing but a damn spy. Bit jealous about it. And then her husband would serve in the Maryland Senate and then the U.S. Senate, and they would host a number of distinguished guests, including George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette, Samuel Chase, a bunch of other people. So anyway, I know that most people won't care, but I love history. That's part of the reason why I love Outlander so much. So that is who that Peggy Chew was. She is a, at least a notable figure. She was somebody that we know. So one of the things they also leave out, William doesn't call her Mother Claire yet. I love that in the book. He calls her Mother Claire. And we don't really get to see that happen. So then we have chapter 100, which is called Lady in Waiting. And this isn't in the show, but this shows us that it's been 1 month now that Jamie was dead. And so the beginning of this chapter is very interesting to me because it is called Lady in Waiting, and it also shows still the loneliness that's happening. Now, I understand why in the show they did not want to have another scene of Claire and John being intimate. Like, it's okay. It's okay if it's that once when they're very drunk and grieving, and it's that whole thing of like, we're both fucking Jamie. That's what they were feeling. But this scene is actually, he can tell that she's still sad. And so she's waiting for Jamie is what it says. It's very sad. And so John comes in and he's like, you are very lonely, my dear, and I know it. Will you not let me bear you company, at least for a little while? So he actually crawls into bed and she like cuddles with him. She's grateful for the comfort and simply the touch of someone else. And this makes sense because we've said multiple times throughout this journey that Claire and Jamie, they are physical touch. Like, their relationship is always at its best when they are around each other all the time and they can physically touch each other all the time. That is their like peak happiness. And so to not only lose your heart's companion, but also any physical and like sexual, loving touch, any kind like that, has to make you feel so bereft, right? And so it starts with them just kind of cuddling, and then he actually even asks, do you wish me to comfort you? And he's like, I do know how you know. So he's actually hinting at, do you want me to give you some pleasure? That is he's asking what you think he's asking in this book, right? And she's like, I know you do. It's not that I don't appreciate it. I do. It's just, he's like, you would feel unfaithful. I understand. And then it says there was a long silence with a growing sense of awareness. And she's like, you wouldn't feel that way? And John says, a standing cock is quite blind, my dear. Surely you know that, being a physician as you are. And this last part here is, yes, I do know that. And she said, and taking him gently but firmly in hand, I dealt with him in tender silence, avoiding any thought of whom he might see in his mind's eye. So Claire literally gives him a little handy in the dark in their bed. So I did not remember this scene. Man, I can't wait till I do my reread of this book completely. And I'm not judging either of them. I think everything they said, it makes sense. She still thinks he's dead. They're both looking for comfort. He's offering to comfort her, and she's like, I'm not feeling up to it, probably because she isn't drunk out of her mind this time. And so she literally like comforts John. She gives him pleasure and is like, it's okay. He's done so much for me. And it's another thing that Diana shows. She shows a lot of like semi-transactional sexual experiences throughout this series, and I think it's fascinating. So anyway, good scene there. And then we have chapter 101, which will be where we wrap this up here. And this is just called Redivivus. I can't pronounce it. But Claire's pinning up her hair. There's going to be tea, and then John comes in. Or there was a scratch at the door, and it was some mail for John. And so he's getting the mail, and then same thing. There's a note from Colonel Graves, but we don't get to it because there's another knock on the door, and he says, not now, come back later. And the man says, well, I would, said a polite voice in a Scottish accent, but there's some urgency, you can. And the door opened, and Jamie stepped in, closing it behind him. He saw me, stood stock still for an instant, and then I was in his arms, the overwhelming warmth and size of him blotting out in an instant everything around me. Oh, there it is, I murmured. What? He said, breaking off for a moment. My blood. Do it again. And then that's where we are. And John's like, will you explain the bloody hell why you're not dead? And he's like, delay for a few seconds longer, Mr. Fraser, and you may go well back to being dead, because they know that there's some people after him. And he's like, they were a bit faster than I thought then. It looks like he came right off the boat for her, is what it says here. Anyway, sorry, I get sucked into reading it instead of covering up. So we have pretty much all the same things that we said now. He's like, he runs into Willie, and then he's like, who are you? I'm James Fraser. You ken me as Alec Mackenzie at Hellwater. And he's like, who the bloody hell am I? And he's like, you're a papist, and your baptismal name is James. It's the only name I had a right to give you. And he's like, God damn you, sir. God damn you to hell. And you knew, didn't you? God damn you too. And he goes to leave. So yeah, so then he kidnaps him, and there we are. And Claire and Willie are just left standing there. So I won't say anymore, because that's where the show cut us off, and we're still not done. We're still not done. There's literally like, what is it? I bet I can count it here. Let me see. There are literally 9 pages left of this that we didn't get to. Even less than that, because the last 2 pages are the stuff with Rachel and Ian that we've already done. So there's literally like 4 or 5 pages left we have to get to. So I assume we'll get through that based on the preview. So anyway, what did I think of accuracy wise between these two? I will say I still rate this one about a 7.5 to an 8 out of 10. And the inaccuracy part for me doesn't really have to do with all those little things that I was just saying about Claire and John. Those are just things I love. And this is my channel, and so I can dwell on them if I want to. I love those little moments. I do. And they're very complex, and those sweet moments that we just had between those two while they were grieving, we're going to pay for those quite desperately pretty soon here, right? But they were beautiful, and without the knowledge of Jamie being alive still, I really feel for them. And I think it's important to remember too, the things that I wish they kind of had showed was that so much time has passed. In total, from her seeing Jamie, it's been months now, and a full like 5-6 weeks since we've heard he's been dead. Now that doesn't mean you should be all ready to move on or anything, but I mean in the state of them believing he's been dead, it's been about that long. And so, you know, you're still heavy in the grief of that. You don't just get over that too quickly. So yeah, I would rate it about that. Also, some of the other inaccuracy stuff is like what I complained about at the very beginning. I think we're kind of dragging the stuff with Roger and Buck out. And in my opinion, that has a lot to do with the fact that there are some certain characters that should be showing up that we haven't, because they take up a good chunk of, not tons of time, but they take up some important scenes in the books. And if we've cut out those characters because we couldn't get the actors or it just isn't working, we're just kind of stringing along that stuff. So yeah, I don't know how quickly we'll move through that. I'm very excited for hopefully that we get some good Jem, and like we need to catch up on what's happening with Jemmy. One of my other guesses, by the way, of where the next episode might pick up. So there's two things I think that the cold open will be. Okay, there's two things I think it could be. I think it will either be, as I said, us seeing this last scene from Jamie's point of view, of like him getting to America and being chased and getting there. And then there would be the cold open, and then it picks up with him and John. I think it might be that. Or I think we could start the cold open with Jem, because there is a couple scenes that I had to flip over that are of what's happening to Jem right now. Rob has showed up to try to make Bree do something for him. Where is little Jem right now? What's happening to him? And he actually has a few POV chapters in the series too, and one of them is right there that we just missed. So I think that would be a cool place to start to revitalize what's going on with that storyline, is to have us cold open with Jem and where he is. I won't, of course, tell y'all where he is, but he's somewhere. I mean, we know he's in 1980 at least. That is true. He is there. And then after the cold open, we'd pick up with Jamie and John where they are. Those are my guesses where we pick up. But we are right at an hour right now. I'll wrap this one up. My throat is absolutely knackered. So give me some green hearts down below if you made this all the way to the end. And as always, I'll have a pinned comment. Let me know what your thoughts on the episode were. Let me know what you think the accuracy, how you feel about it. Whatever you want to say. I love it. The discussions under these videos are my favorite. And what I also love too is some people start the series at different points. So some people will binge all of my recaps at one time and they'll comment. So share your thoughts and let's chat as a community together. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week. Bye.